Houses are the backbone of the chart. Without them, you really can't say anything personally meaningful because they are the contextual exposition for everything else. If you have not seen my videos on the planets and the signs in astrology, make sure that you do check those out so that you are able to layer this on top of that. Those will be all linked down below. Houses describe the areas of life both internally within us and externally out in the world, and it's phrased as I have X planet in Y sign in Z house. So if you are excited to dive into the significations for the 12 houses, make sure that you like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so that you are always up to date with what the stars have in store for you. This video is brought to you by my very own Astrology Academy. This is a comprehensive deep dive into the crucial foundational what, why, and how of reading charts in astrology. I've been working on this ideal product of the foundational one-stop shop, like what do you need to know to know astrology for months now, and I'm so excited to have it released and public and able to be enrolled in by students such as you who might feel the spark to get to the bottom of the roots of astrology. There's a lot of extraneous information and a lot of bullshit online, and I wanted to be as thorough and as concise as I could to set everyone up for success. And if you are very, very new to astrology and you're not sure if you want to learn it or not, or you just like literally want to figure out more about what it is, I have a webinar also linked down below that you can watch called Actually Learning Astrology, the Missing Piece, which is like square one. If you're new to it and you want to dip your toe in, you can watch that. But the information for enrolling in the Astrology Academy, if you are looking for like a comprehensive semester style deep dive, take it at your own pace, but I'm there for live calls and whatnot, linked down below. So with that out of the way, I'm Maren. Hi. I am a professional astrologer, author, and current philosophy student, combining traditional Hellenistic astrological techniques with modern psychological counseling dynamics to provide grounded guidance and teach. So looking into the houses now, off the bat, every chart is a promise to unfold. That's like square one understanding. And any chart of a human nativity, it can be, you know, the chart of anything, but any chart of a human nativity involves both internal dynamics and external dynamics as well. That your life is not just your psychology, it's also a lot of external shit too. Houses thus provide context for where certain configurations of energy present themselves. And we have the 12-fold division of the zodiac into the houses, 12 houses that things fall in. I use whole sign houses very proudly, very vocal about that, as I recommend that you do too. And if you want a full video on why I use whole sign houses based on like set theory and astronomy and metaphysical considerations, do let me know down below in a comment if you want a video on that. Because I know that, for example, the Astrology podcast and other traditional astrologers have a lot of content that they might have made, but maybe my audience isn't familiar with some of the other backbones of it. And if you know me, you know that I don't like speak or advocate for things that I don't feel like I can really hash out and explain really well. So if you want to like hear valid points and a grounded point of view and reasoning behind that, let me know. So the meanings of the houses come from three primary considerations. Angularity, so whether a house is cadent, angular, or succedent. Aspect relations to the ascendant. Does the house form a whole sign aspect to the sign of the ascendant? And the planetary joy scheme, which is a really complex like elemental configuration that I hash out in my course. Like it takes several hours worth of lectures to build up to, so I'm not going to get into that here. Astrology Academy info is below though. We'll be running through the straight meanings in this video, which I know is not as satisfying as knowing the why and like everything, but that is what the course is for. It takes a while to build up to that, like several weeks into the houses. So for now, you'll get the, you know, what you can use and what you can depend on, but if you want to learn more, you know where to go. So starting with the first house, also known as the helm or the hour marker. It is an angular house. It is the first house. It represents most primarily self, physical body, character. It is your vitality. It is where the sky met the earth, where your soul entered your body. And this intermediary between the mind and the body, because it's both the ascendant designates above the horizon and below the horizon often deals with the body or more like corporeal matters, and above the ascendant deals with more mental or abstract matters, and the first house contains both. And it directly relates to the native, so the native's body, the native's character, the native's mind, and any planets there will show up as very relevant to someone's identity. It is a very you, me house. And the condition of the first house and its ruler will really indicate how willingly and how well that ship is steered. It's the helm. It is the steersman of the ship. And it is one of, if not the most foundational house when speaking on a person, like the person itself. That other parts of the chart will not be as you indicative as the ruler and the ruler's placement and just the rising sign itself with the first house. And For a few thousand years, up until about 100 years ago, when people asked your sign, they knew it was rising sign because the rising sign changes every 2.5 hours while the sun sign changes every 30 days. So it really is very much you, but it's the joy of Mercury as well, because Mercury's communication does very well as an intermediary between expressing yourself and living yourself. And it's you, it's your identity. It is boom, slap, you as a person. Second house is a succedent house. It is the gate of Hades. It is immediately what follows after you have a body, which is dealing with supporting that, which takes money, like values, food. That is shit of the second house. It is, it's the best of the quote bad houses, but it's pretty much neutral. It's not that these houses are really actually bad, that's just the translation. It's more that they're just troublesome, effortful areas of life. And making money and providing for yourself takes effort. So this house deals specifically with finances and possessions. It is immediately what happens after you're born. So it's your relationship to possessions and the way that you support yourself in life often. That it can describe your relationship to money. Like some signs will hoard more, some signs are more erratic. Planets there can describe the way that you spend and hold on to valuables. And Bonatti, he, an astrologer from the medieval period, he talked about this being like the substance or the native, or often relating to food, and food starts as a possession. And the second house ruler and its condition can often indicate like your psychological patterning around self-worth and how you provide for yourself as a result, either monetarily or through the way that you like nourish yourself. Basically, most clear, it describes how you make money, because money is not always straightforward due to like your primary day-to-day job. That I see clients where they make the most money through like weird shit like their pets or their kids, like things that are kind of random. That second house most basically is finances and possessions, pretty straightforward. The third house is a cadent house. It is it's the joy of the moon, and so it's called the goddess. It is a house that from that moon joy gets a lot of meanings, like communication and short-term travel, and the way that it is very near and dear information. And it is what is supporting the fourth house of home and family, and that which supports home and family are like the nearby surroundings of your neighborhood, which is why like the third house is elementary education and the information on a near and dear level to you. It's people that we see on a day-to-day basis, so things like siblings or comrades or neighbors, very much a third house matter. It is comfortable travel, like your day-to-day commute, or if you have a house a few hours away, a vacation home or a ranch or something, it's very much third house travel. It is your normal routine, which involves a lot of information, either intake or dispersal. So how do you watch the news? Are you a news junkie? Are you someone who has very much like a hermited, I don't watch or take in any information? Do you create a lot on an elementary level? Like, do you write a column? Do you write horoscopes? The third house can indicate that you're creating things on an elementary news-based level. And it is the least positive of the positive houses, not because it's like has things that aren't going for it, but because it's just kind of like mundane day-to-day support of what comes next with family. You know, it's not outstanding, but it involves elementary education, short-term travel, siblings, near and dear info. The fourth house is known as the subterraneous pivot. It is the next angular house. It is below the earth, darkest, most foundational, most private part of the chart. And it is an angular house, and angular houses manifest very clearly because they're the backbone of the chart. They're like the vertebrae. And it's the least powerful because it is after the ascendant. It doesn't offer a superior square. It's the bottom of the chart, but it is still powerful. It is still very, very foundational. It's the foundational anchor for the chart, and therefore it represents things like family, parents, private life, early life. It is childhood experience or that which comes as a result of it, such as parental background and ancestry. And it can indicate both home and property in terms of both energetic and literal. So that I see sometimes people with a lot of fourth house ties work with ancestral work, or they are like root workers, whereas sometimes I see fourth house strengths and it's someone who's a real estate agent. So home, property, home, property, house, and also ancestors all fall into the fourth. It can be what you get from your family, especially if it's configured to the 8th house, but what you get from your family in terms of like experiences and emotional patterning a lot of the time, it's hidden from view, like it's midnight, it is very dark, but it's a point of the chart that we are aware of, so that we keep that part to ourselves, either knowingly or unknowingly. And it is, it can indicate how people are private. Like, are they very well exposed? Do they very, very guard close to home? Do they wear their heart on their sleeve? And how do they interact with like the idea of land and property? Did they inherit a lot of property? Do they own? Do they do Airbnb? Do they live in the same apartment for 5 years? Do they live in the same apartment for 50 years? Fourth house can say things like that. And the fourth house can also indicate the final outcome of things. It's like kind of going back to center, that where we start is where we end up. And the fourth house is kind of a, it's a very, very primitive idea, not in terms of like undeveloped, I guess undeveloped, but not in a pejorative way, but it's a very foundational primitive house. The fifth house is the house of good fortune. It is what follows from the fourth house of family, which is children, and usually like good, happy things happen after we are grounded in something underneath us. And it's the joy of Venus, which is why the fifth house relates to things like children and romance and creativity. The fifth house can relate to sex or sexual activity in general. Venus having its joy there, really allowing it to show up as a house that it is pleasurable. Like, pleasure and enjoyability is this house. And with it being creativity, it can be what you literally create reproduction-wise with children or with like spawn and offspring, or it can be the legacy that you leave in terms of creative projects and output, or like students and apprentices. Those are fifth house matters, of things that you are bringing into existence based on your own creation. And it can indicate like fertility as a result. Fifth house and its ruler can indicate whether you're a fertile person biologically, and like if you're able to create things easily in your life. What you create takes a life of its own, and since it's a succeedant house following the fourth, the fifth house is like what you are offspringing into the world of experiences and whatnot that is not directly you, which is a little bit detached, and that's where some of the fun comes in, that it's not, you know, deeply, deeply personal, but it's how you spend your time, it's how you enjoy yourself, it's how you unwind. And it's the house of good fortune, so it's kind of like, if there's a ruler there, if there's a planet there, that shit tends to be fortunate and tends to be received well by its audience. The sixth house is the house of bad fortune. So it is one of the major challenging houses, the disadvantageous houses. It does not aspect the ascendant. It is not quite as detrimental as the 12th house, but it is a challenging house. And it's the joy of Mars, because if the sixth house deals with dealing with the physical body, with illness or injury or just physical upkeep, the sixth house is shit we have to deal with to do the shit that we want to do, and so having Mars there is really joyous and helpful, because Mars will deal with the shit that you need to do. And it is rising up to support the relationships of the seventh house, so it is like you have to have your physical shit together. I'm cussing so much in this, I'm sorry. Sixth house is the joy of Mars. To be able to form relationships with others, you have to have your things together, and that's why the sixth house is illness, physical injury, like dealing with bodily things. And it can also deal with coworkers or people that you have to manage to have the supportive relationships otherwise. People that work beneath you or you profit off of can show up here, so like subordinates, customers, things like that. Not always customers, but like people that work for you in a certain way. In ancient times, it dealt with slaves. That's not applicable anymore. Now more times it deals with things like pets or just people that you were having to take care of beneath you. It's the things you have to deal with to do the things you want to do, and even a strong sixth house is going to be responding to challenges. So that if you're a doctor and you have a strong sixth house because you work with the physical challenges of the body, it's still like you're working with challenges even if you're really good at that. The seventh house is known as the setting place. It is sunset, opposite to the first house. It is where the soul meets the body of the other. So it is the angular house, but it is sunset. It is the blending of mind and body of another. And so it's our one-to-one partnerships, and it is the first clear indicator of something outside of ourselves that is mostly other-oriented, with another party. It is always, in any chart, the seventh house is the other party. In a human life, that's generally relationships at large, and that is one-to-one bonds that are romantic, that are contractual, that are just reoccurring themes. It is the opposite sign to us, and so it's sometimes opposites attract, or it's sometimes that our relationships tend to emerge as the manifestation of that sign's energy. And heavy seventh house often relates to being someone who does a lot of client work, or who relationships are a big part of your life, where you often find yourself in a relationship. And Depending on the ruler, that can show up in another area of life, that you have relationships like in a certain area of your life a lot of the time. And transits to the 7th house often relate to another person, like your partner instead of you, or a partner emerging or leaving you. And the 7th house, like we all have one, even if we don't have planets there, so it can describe your type or who you tend to attract in dynamics. But it can also be competitors or people that you are engaging in feuds against. It is known enemy. It is the person directly across the table from you. And sometimes that's great. And sometimes if it's the chart of like a tennis match, it's going to be your opponent. So it can also be the process of death. There's a bit of debate around that, but I see it as sunset. It is the fading, the melding, the limbo point between self and other, or aliveness and death. The 8th house is known as the idle place, and it is not the two worst of the disadvantageous places, but it does not aspect the ascendant, and so it is a disadvantageous place. It is difficult. It follows the 7th house, so it's what you get from partners, which is often money, inheritances, and their psychological baggage. Because it is, it's this like right before sunset energy of an afternoon pick-me-up necessary. It's idle, like things in the 8th house often are kind of unseen or take a lot of effort and time to manifest. So because it doesn't aspect the ascendant, it is unsupportive of life, and it often deals with the actual event of death, like the sudden or the instantaneous event of death. And it can also indicate, therefore, if we have placements there that we are mediums or that we work with ancestors. Do not ask me if I have an 8th house stellium, am I going to die? Obviously, we're all going to die. It just indicates that probably the idea of mortality is something that you're more aware of. It's more so like configurations with 8th house rulers that can indicate events regarding death, but it's not as simple as just straightforward like 8th house equals I'm going to die, because that's a categorical misunderstanding, because we're all dying, you know what I mean? But with it being what you get from other people, it often indicates inheritance, debts, loans, things that we have to interact with others regarding, even though they're uncomfortable. And it can indicate psychological issues because it's kind of like buried and difficult to self-actualize. Not getting credit is a big thing with 8th house. Like you work 8th house stellium, like you work so fucking hard and you're like, where's my crown? That kind of thing. So it can be people who work with other people's shit, like therapists, like counselors, like consultants, accountants even show up here. So that like the 4th house, it can sometimes be deep and it can sometimes be shallow. 8th house can sometimes be like a life of tumultuous death. And sometimes it can be, I work with people's finances and I'm an accountant. Like it can really vary depending on the sign and placement and whatnot. Power dynamics do show up here, and transformation shows up here, not in a like rise from the ashes, death and rebirth, but like a I paid my taxes and now I'm out of debt, I transformed. 9th house is the house of God, and it is a cadent house that is rising up to support the 10th house of career. So what supports your career and vocation, your schooling and your beliefs and your outlook on life. So the 9th house is the house of God, said to be the joy of the sun, because if the sun is recognition and fame, if those things are going after higher knowledge and philosophy, like that's a pretty good use of the ego in that way. So it is the most positive cadent house. Cadent houses tend to take longer to manifest. It is the sun's joy, like I mentioned, so it's a very explorative mental house. It is what the mind wants to explore, which can be philosophies, religions, belief systems. Often astrology shows up here, so do things like law or politics or higher level studies of complex matters. But it can also indicate foreign matters or multicultural affairs that really expand our horizons in our mind. And prominent 9th house placements often are well-traveled and or well-educated. That it can indicate long distance travel relative to your upbringing and point of view, because distance is relative. So for some people, New York to LA is short term. Like for me, that would be more domestic and therefore 3rd house. For some people, New York to LA is like the first plane they've ever been on. So that would be very long distance, and that would be more 9th house. So it's long haul travel. Like me going to Bali last summer, that was a fucking 9th house trip. And with it being religion or philosophy, it's kind of like the path of knowledge in general. So whatever we believe in often shows up based on the 9th house and its ruler. Like, is the person conservative? Are they religious? Are they anti-religious? Sun North Node conjunction in the 9th house. Like I'm like out there, but it can indicate higher education, so the way that you find your knowledge. 9th house placements are the collecting the PhDs. Not always. traditionally, but it can be just being a master or someone who's wise in a certain lineage and the lifelong pursuit or the quest for that knowledge. The 10th house is known as the midheaven, and it is a very strong angular house, and it was traditionally called the midheaven. What we call the midheaven is the MC. It is the ecliptic highest point. It's different, but they used to call the 10th house the midheaven, even though we call the midheaven as for a calculation point, so clarification, but it is the most prominent high point in the sky generally. It is very visible, very high part of the sky, and it is angular and it is squaring the midheaven. So there is a debate whether the 1st house or the 10th house is more powerful. I think they're both powerful. Both 10th house and 1st house are very powerful because it is your career. It's what you are, quote, famous for. It's your public image, your reputation, your vocation of visibility. And for some people, that's a big part of their life. Some people, that's a big troublesome, big struggle. For some people, they're like, boom, career, I'm visible, I'm seen. It's a pretty straightforward house. It's high noon. It's very elevated. It's career. It's deliberate curation. So it can indicate things like social media, and often planets in the 10th are very, very visible for what you're known for. Wherever the falling, floating midheaven is in your chart, it can be anywhere in the top half. It will import 10th house significations into that house. So for example, my midheaven falls in my 11th house. What I am known for in terms of career will likely do with the 11th house of groups and friends and networking. So that's an example of 10th house relates to career, reputation, and public image, and the midheaven and whatever house it falls in will mix that into that house as well. The 11th house is the house of good spirit. It is a succeeding house of following the 10th house. And the planets in there are rising up to the 10th house, so they are like supportive of the dreams of the career, kind of, and it is the joy of Jupiter, which makes a lot of sense because it is this larger collective of good fortune. It is literally good spirit. It's not good fortune, it's good spirit, excuse me. It is a very social, very positive house. It is groups and organizations and dreams that support you. So it's like the larger collectives that rise up to support you. And it can indicate audiences, or if for politicians, like their conglomerate of voters. Often celebrities or politicians have a really loaded or prominent 11th house ruler to indicate that they're very supportive. It's like social capital and audiences behind you. And it can be friends, but more so like the collective of acquaintances that you would have on social media, not your one-to-one 7th house bonds. Positive or negative indicators of the 11th house and its ruler can indicate your relationship to friendship or socializing. And more so nowadays, it can really deal with networking and how you like network or market yourself. It's a very privileged house in the sense that it's things outside of you on a very, very external level that befall you. And that's why it can indicate dreams, hopes, and wishes, because often our capacity to hold dreams depends on the basis of like an early upbringing or things outside of our control. And finally, we have the 12th house, which is a Caden house. It's called the house of bad spirit. It is has no aspect to the ascendant. It's the worst of the disadvantageous houses. It is, it's the sign that your mother was in when she was having labor, probably. So it's kind of like this twilight zone, otherworldly, like in between reality and not place of being isolated and in danger. And it is the internal world of self-sabotage. It is the isolation in prison. It is the mental hospital. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Rarely does the 12th house of isolation show up as an isolated yoga glamping retreat in Bali. It's usually, I'm going through hell on my own. Like very, very validated of that. And it can deal with mental health issues. So the 6th house tends to be physical health, and opposite to that, oppositionary, like they're connected, mental health issues is 12th. And if you have a really strong 12th house and like you have really positive indicators there, it can indicate that you help solve others' isolation with their mental health, or like you work in a prison or you work in foreign liberatory matters, because it can indicate foreign imprisonment. So like often nowadays that deals with being imprisoned for being a marginalized identity or feeling trapped because of that, so it can deal with that. Can be hidden enemies or betrayal and people that you don't know are backstabbing you, people who like end up backstabbing you, or can deal with like randomly wild animals, so big wild animals. Like there's a weird traditional rationale behind that. It's just funny that 6th house is like pets and small animals and 12th house is elephants and shit like that. But with it being places of exile and isolation, it can show up as like spiritual practices like meditation or Vipassana retreats or the way that you spend your alone time, which will definitely depend on if the condition of your 12th house and its ruler are really good. That tends to mean that your time alone, even in isolation, is spent well. And it's rare, like it has the condition of the house innately going against it, but I have my 12th house ruler as Jupiter in domicile in Pisces in the 3rd house. Like I tend to have a pretty steady mental health and internal world. So all 12 houses are covered. I know ending on like a sour note, but that's the 12th house for you. If you did enjoy this and you want to learn more about this, Astrology Academy info is below. I'd love to have you like hash out, like we go into so much time in this, so many whys, whats, and hows explained with the houses and all the other concepts and how to read a chart. So yeah, check out the Astrology Academy below. If you want a reading from me, I have either my information or my waitlist linked below. Otherwise, like, subscribe, comment anything that you want to share about the houses, any houses that like you have stellium in or that you want to share about. Sending so much love, and I will see you in the next one.
But there is one